The Tom Woods Show, episode 2045.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. Lew Rockwell is back by popular demand. Lew, of course, is the publisher of LewRockwell.com, and he's the founder and chairman of the Mises Institute. He is one of the most important influences on my own thinking. He's been a great benefactor to me over the years, and it's always a privilege and a pleasure to have a chance to talk to him. Lew, welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, since I spoke to you last, something very, very significant in a bad way happened over at LewRockwell.com, and I guess that has to do with Google ads won't run on LRC anymore because you're publishing forbidden content that they disapprove of?
Yeah, that's right. And it was a huge amount of income for a small website. They cut us off. And again, because I had published misinformation on the vaccine and the virus and related subjects. Quote unquote misinformation, of course.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we both know the double standard at work here. Nobody has ever been, as far as I know, punished by, let's say, Twitter for exaggerating the threat of the virus or making wild statements and wild predictions or nothing like that. So it only runs one way. We know that. I think I can now call him kind of a friend, the Broadway actor or ex-Broadway actor, because he won't comply, Clifton Duncan, had a tweet the other day where he said, quote, "The science changes," unquote. And he says, yeah, it changes into what we were all saying 6 months ago. It just has a habit of doing that. So how have you coped with this problem?
Well, I asked people to make donations, and we got a lot of donations, almost as much as Google would bring in for a year. On the other hand, of course, these are not necessarily that Google was every year. So I just have to see, but it was a very encouraging response from the listeners. Very encouraging.
Wow, that really, really is good to hear. That is good to hear. We can keep on keeping on for the time being as we figure out what the future is going to look like. Now, speaking of that, we know that Murray Rothbard was an optimist, a long-run optimist. And we saw that in his personality, which was very cheerful and upbeat, found humor in so much. But I feel like the present situation is a real challenge to that. For example, somebody was pointing out this morning that the vaccine passport system, apart from being evil and unjust, it's also useless and pointless and doesn't accomplish anything. And the evidence is just insurmountable that it's not doing a thing to accomplish what its architects supposedly want it to do, which is to protect our health and keep the virus from spreading. There's just no evidence that it does that. And yet, now I expect the lizard people to do things that make no sense from our point of view and just increase their power and are pointless, and I expect that from them. But the thing that contributes to pessimism on my part is how much of the general public goes along with and cheers for a policy that has no evidence to back it, that clearly is useless, that if you even took a second to glance at the evidence is useless, and they still favor it, even though they have to know it's not going to, if they're remotely informed, they have to know it's not going to accomplish what it's supposed to, but they want to do it, it looks like, because they enjoy, apparently the human race likes to take some people and put them in an other category and point at them and scapegoat them and say, we're not like those people, we're superior to those people. And that's what this seems to be an exercise in. So in light of that, how is it possible to be optimistic?
Well, as you point out, Murray, of course, was a long-term optimist. He wasn't an optimist a lot of times in the short term. And my guess is that would not change if he were with us today. And I wonder, for example, certainly what you're pointing out is true of city people. I wonder if it's true of rural people, because my own experience is that people who live in rural areas outside of the big cities are less likely to go along with this stuff, less likely to believe in the nonsense that they're purveying. So, I think that would be one reason to be optimistic. But it's true there are people who love, as you say, putting some people in the other category and punishing them. And of course, that's what all of this stuff is about. It's about punishing people. It's nothing to do with health and whether, Fauci stuff or what's happening also at the state levels in places like California, New York, Illinois. They seek to hurt people, to punish them, and they're getting away with it. And that's highly unfortunate, of course. And we also know that Biden and his cohorts in the government are promoting the idea that anybody who says boo to the federal government is a domestic terrorist. And we don't know exactly what they intend to do to us yet, but they're having, in rural North Carolina, they're having big exercises against what they call people who are freedom fighters. Well, I don't know who that might be, but they want to capture them and kill them. So that's certainly not something to be optimistic about. But I think there are still a lot of people who are Tom Woodsians on these issues, even beyond the many people that you directly influence. And so I think I'm still a Rothbardian in that sense, that as evil as these people are, as rotten as they are, as the unbelievable nonsense and baloney that they purvey is, I think there still is reason among many Americans for long-term optimism.
Well, at the very least, going forward into the future, it will now be necessary to be, I think, a bit more discriminating in terms of where we choose to live and the kinds of people we choose to associate with. I have never been the sort to make everything political, and I always feel like that's been a hallmark of the left, that what ketchup brand you use, they're going to interrogate you because don't you know they give money to such and such. I refuse to live my life like that. But at the same time, now that I've seen that there are jurisdictions that would think absolutely nothing of ruining my life at the drop of a hat, and they would be cheered on in doing that by some of my neighbors, that does make me say, now I'm comfortably in Florida, but that would very much make me say, I have to be very careful. I now know people have raised their hands in this episode and identified themselves as the kind of people I need to steer clear from. I wish there could be some way we could just have one country, like of LRC readers and Tom Woods Show listeners, and we could reproduce what we do like about the Blue Cities. I love the culture. I mean, there's a great Alabama Shakespeare Festival. There are wonderful Shakespeare festivals, not just theater, but museums and whatever. We could reproduce that in our country and have and invite all those unvaccinated actors back with us and have a thriving little civilization. But before you know it, the UN would be authorizing, the occupation of our capital.
No, and maybe the bombing of our capital.
Yeah, right. So, just the other day, by the way, I happened to have dinner with somebody who was in D.C. on January 6th and who went into the Capitol and who's been released, at least for the time being, but is awaiting sentencing. And I had a great conversation with him. I can't reveal anything about it until the whole matter is resolved. But I'll say that he told me that he went in there because they were all hearing, and I had not heard this before, but he said they were all hearing that the authorities were beating up an old man. And so he wanted to go in there to see what was going on. And he said, I'm no Trump sycophant. That wasn't what I was doing there. But then when I heard that, I thought I better find out what's happening. So that was interesting to me. But what's equally interesting to me is just when you think the DC libertarian set can't possibly get any worse, they're hysterically repeating the Whoopi Goldberg opinion about January 6th, while meanwhile a guy like this was in solitary confinement. And I helped to get him legal representation that got him out. But he was in solitary confinement for an extended period of time, and they kept the lights on 24 hours a day as a mild form of torture to interrupt his sleep. And meanwhile, we're getting these crybaby stories about what a terrible thing for the regime January 6th was. I don't even think I have a question here, Lew, just maybe asking for your comment.
Well, of course, we know that this was ginned up by the FBI and various other groups that work for the government or are the government to get people to go inside. These people who were very prominent in bringing this about on the outside somehow haven't made the FBI wanted list. They aren't in jail. Nobody's looking for them. I guess they could find them at the CIA headquarters. But
Yep.
It's on the other hand, there are people who've been in jail for over a year with no charges against them. I mean, it's this is something that you might expect in a totalitarian society, and I guess in some ways we are moving towards a totalitarian society. But clearly they wanted people to go in. The cops were inviting people to come in, saying, come on in. And we have this on video. So this is not just a made-up right-wing opinion, and as they would claim. The whole thing was unfortunate, but I don't think really they've fooled anybody. I don't believe that people think there was an insurrection, because there were no weapons, not even a knife among all the people who were in there. Then, of course, there was the murder of Ashley Babbitt by this horrendous cop who just shot her and killed her. And he said that she was posing a threat, he said, because she was unarmed. She was a young woman, a horrendous act of criminality by the cops. We just found out yesterday that the D.C. cops never even interviewed this guy. If somebody murders somebody in D.C., the D.C. cops at least are supposed to interview him and find out what was going on. This didn't happen at all, and he's been promoted. Now he's in charge of all the security for the Capitol. So I guess he'll shoot a lot of people if anybody else goes into that place. By the way, isn't this always called the People's House? Somehow, of course, they don't want people in there, needless to say.
No people can go in the People's House.
So it's horrendous. And of course, this is happening in D.C. in their gulag. They're routinely beating up the prisoners. And this is considered just fine. I mean, I know one man who had bones around his eye broken and lost sight in his eye. Of course, nobody's charged over this. It's perfectly fine. And again, these people have been in jail for a year in solitary confinement without any charges being made against them. So this is, I guess, the new USA. It's a criminal culture, and I noticed there's going to be a big march on D.C. by Robert Kennedy Jr. coming up at the end of this month. Well, I think it's maybe the 23rd. I'm not 100% sure that's correct. You could look at my site today, and I have an item on it. But I hope that they don't shoot them. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But he has to be one of the bravest men I know. I mean, he's just tremendously brave, considering what's happened to members of his family. To be out front on these issues against Fauci and Gates and all the monsters who are harming us with these deadly vaccines. So I hope everybody who's in that march is okay. I hope I'm not putting cold water on it, because if I were in D.C., I would definitely go to it, whereas I would not have gone to the Trump march, even if I had been there, just because I thought Trump wasn't serious. I thought about what was going on, and of course that turned out to be true. So the whole thing was. I noticed, by the way, Trump has not ever mentioned anybody who's in jail. These people who are in jail because they were his followers for the most part. He never has even mentioned them. While of course he's always praising himself as being the man who saved millions of lives with my heroic vaccines. So he's taken, of course, a whole lot of lives with his rotten, evil vaccines. And I think this is maybe one reason he lost the last election. And certainly it'll be one reason if he does not get the nomination this next time, that'll be a reason, because a lot of Americans are sick and tired of this stuff. They know what he did. It's not something to be proud of. He could apologize for it. He could say, but of course he won't never do that, because he just praises himself always. It's unfortunate.
Well, indeed. And in fact, I guess that's an opportunity to talk about what might happen. Now, Dan McCarthy says he thinks Trump will run and that he'll get the nomination. Now, I don't know if that means he wins the general election, but I couldn't possibly be more against him running again. I mean, number one, because he'll emphasize all the wrong things. He's more interested in getting credit for the vaccines than he is in seeing the situation clearly. But the other thing is, we've seen what it looks like. He surrounds himself with people who despise him and the people he claims to stand for. It's hard to imagine he would be particularly vigorous against vaccine passports and vaccine restrictions and stuff when he is Mr. Vaccine. I don't see how he could really be that. How could his heart really be in it? Would be another thing. But also, I suppose this would be true of almost any decent candidate. But he is like a unique energizer and fundraiser for the Democrats, unlike any phenomenon, any force ever seen before in history. And I don't particularly want to encourage, I want the left to be demoralized and dispirited and disorganized and sniping at each other. I want that. And I'm afraid Trump runs again, that unites them again.
Well, I also hope he doesn't run again. I think it would be a huge mistake. Part of it is his age. I mean, I think everybody probably has had enough of elderly statesmen, quote unquote, in D.C. running our lives. And Trump would be in that category, especially this next time. But he's not serious, and you're exactly right, because he surrounded himself with left wingers and with neocons, especially people who hate him and hate, as you say, anybody who's in favor of him. They're as bad as the Democrats. So who knows what that's all about? It's also, he was crazed and being for various foreign countries, and he just, I think, was a mess. And of course, what he did with the Fed, and I mean, he just was not good, despite what the Trumpian Republicans claim that he made everybody rich, and when he was a wonderful president, and it was great. And so I think we've had enough of him. I'd like to think he can't get the nomination. I can't be sure, of course, but if he does, I think it's trouble. And as you say, the Democrats would all be crazy and happy.
Right, and I'm not in the business of encouraging that to happen. And it clearly would just be a matter of Trump wants revenge, and I have no dog in that particular hunt. I want action to fix the country. I have an opportunity to talk to Scott Atlas coming up, and I think that now he's an interesting figure because he's not quite a Lew Rockwell, and in fact he worked for Mitt Romney as an advisor before, although I am quite sure his eyes have been opened a bit since then, because he has to know, having observed Romney, how Romney managing this would have turned out. It wouldn't have turned out that he would have hired Scott Atlas to advise him, right? We all know that. Would have been Fauci all the way. But nevertheless, as far as he went, he was the too little too late. And I don't mean that as a knock on him. I mean as a knock on Trump taking so long to get a Scott Atlas in there. I wish we could have had an Atlas shredding the press mercilessly day after day, and then having press conferences with one after another top credentialed person. Because, I mean, we know that at this point we have to even doubt the credentials at this. But that's what else can you conclude from all this craziness? But just to shut the other side up and just relentlessly, I want charts. I want before and after. Here's the chart. Then we did this. Here's the chart. Didn't do anything. So stop telling people that they're stupid or backward for doing these things, because as you can see from the chart, it doesn't do anything. I think most people have never seen or even thought of such charts. If the White House is supposed to be, or at least in Teddy Roosevelt's view, a bully pulpit, well, let's get a good bully in there who's not going to use it to actually bully peaceful Americans, but to shout through a bullhorn what the real truth of the virus is. And that's what I would have wanted, and we never really got that.
No, and of course, Trump put Fauci in charge.
Yeah.
And he also was responsible for closing down the economy. I mean, one of the most horrendous things, that alone is a reason that he should be hanging his head down in Mar-a-Lago and staying out of politics. That he
and
shut
that's
down
another
the
reason that he
economy.
can't.
It's just, what an unbelievably evil thing.
Right, and that's why he can't ever be really fully good on this, because in principle he has to say that at least for a while shutting down was a good thing. So he can never be sound on it.
That's right.
So, all right, well, let's go to something happier. As you look back on your life, what would you say is the one thing you've done that you are the most proud of?
I would say starting the Mises Institute. That has been a source of tremendous joy to me, and I think it's done some good, and I think that that's continuing to be the case, and I am very proud of that.
Anything you would have done differently, different emphases, personnel, whatever, different strategy, or do you look back and feel content?
No, well, I mean, I think there might be a person or two I would just as soon have never had been involved with. That's true, but I think nevertheless, despite a mistake or two in terms of personnel, I think really the Institute has turned out just great. I mean, and I think it does wonderful work, and I think young people are very interested in Austrian economics, in part because of the Institute. And so, yeah, and when I say I'm proud of it, I'm absolutely not saying that I did everything right.
I have sometimes said that the Mises Institute is really my favorite place on earth. Now, I'm not saying that pre-2020 Vienna doesn't have an edge on the Mises Institute, but what I mean is when I'm there, I feel fulfilled in so many ways. I feel intellectually fulfilled. I feel like I'm in a haven of sanity and of really, really smart and principled people. I have so many friends associated with the Institute, so many great memories there. It's an absolute thrill for me every opportunity I have to be there.
I just want to say how much of a thrill it was to have you come here as an undergraduate at Harvard. And I must say you were immediately recognizable as a star. I mean, I knew that you were going places, and you more than fulfilled that internal prediction of mine.
Lew, I have a picture of myself from the Mises University in the early 90s where I'm standing next to Murray Rothbard. And Murray looks great. He looks exactly like every other picture of him. And I am the nerdiest kid you can imagine. I still have the 80s haircut it is just a disaster. And it's my one picture with Rothbard where Woods is at his absolute nerdiest. So now people are going to be Googling this, trying to find that picture. But anyway, I wouldn't change a thing. I just loved it. It was great to have a chance to meet him. And I remember this, of course, this is before the internet. I mean, we had email. But really, I don't even know if we had a web browser by 1993. But I do remember the faculty being introduced at that event, and everybody was introduced in alphabetical order, except Rothbard, who was introduced at the very end. And when he was introduced, everyone in that room was on his feet cheering. Like there wasn't anybody saying, "Oh, I'm not sure about that Rothbard. I heard he thinks such a." No one. Well, because why would you? Well, what normal person would react that way? Everybody. He was mobbed by students constantly, and the great thing was, as we all know, he was a great night owl. He outlasted them all. Like they're all just barely trying to keep their eyes open because they do not want this to end, and he's just yapping away, and and each one of them gets peeled away, having to ultimately concede defeat and go to bed. I mean, there is just, we just don't have anyone like him. And doggone it, did we need him during this COVID thing?
Murray praised you in many ways, but I always remember him saying that you represented something he'd always dreamed of our movement having, an historian in new economics. Because he said most historians, of course, are anti-economic or they're just terrible. Whereas you are a great Austrian economist in addition to being a great historian. And then he was just thrilled by that.
I appreciate that. And of course, I was thrilled that he was a great historian, economist, philosopher, sociologist, movie critic, friend, everything he could possibly be. So, yeah, what an absolute thrill. Now, I've got a question from my supporters group that is one of these things that I've never really been able to give, frankly, a good answer to, especially as things have gotten worse. So we know that politics is kind of a loser's game in a way, and we see what happens. Even if you do, by some miracle, manage to elect a genuinely decent person, it's rare that they stay that way for very long. Now, I personally think Thomas Massie has distinguished himself pretty well in his office, especially during COVID and everything. And now he's saying that his office is not going to comply with the DC vaccine.
Let's never forget, by the way, Trump viciously attacked him.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, he did.
He attacked him the way he never attacked any Democrat, for example.
Yeah, that's right. No, and while Massie was on the House floor, his phone was lighting up with Trump calling him, and Massie just wouldn't take the call because he was busy. I'll talk to him later. I just love it. I mean, that right there is a Ron Paul move. If Ron's giving a speech, even if Ronald Reagan's calling him, he said, "Look, you're just going to have to wait, Mr. President. I'm giving my speech." But okay, but the thing is that we know, I mean, nobody knows better than Lew Rockwell the nature of the people we're opposing. And in 2019, we thought the worst thing they were going to do was the woke ideology. Now, as bad as that is, I don't think it holds a candle to what's happened under COVID. So the question is, if we say, well, we're just above politics and it doesn't really solve any problems anyway, and we got to just live our own lives, okay, then aren't you just handing the field over to the craziest of the crazy? What is your opinion on this matter in 2022?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with holding yourself above politics. if that's what you want. On the other hand, if you want to be involved in politics and you think you can do some good, well, go to it, is my view. I was involved in real politics earlier in my life, and I don't regret not being involved in politics now.
What do you think about Stuart Rhodes being brought up on sedition charges? You know him from Oath Keepers?
Yes. Is he? I didn't even realize he was being brought up.
Yeah, apparently so. Because at first, because he hadn't been brought up on charges, some of the people who were concerned about this weird Ray Epps figure were speculating that Stuart Rhodes was a Fed, which struck me as highly implausible. I guess there's almost nothing I wouldn't believe in this day and age. But yeah, we just saw that. So let's get some information on that and come back to that at some point.
Well, I will say that recently people have attacked the Justice Department by saying they keep talking about an insurrection, but they've never indicted anybody for being an insurrectionist or a seditionist. So 4 days after these charges were made, they did indict people. So this is not exactly a good thing to have happened, obviously. And I would say anybody who was indicted like that is, I'm sure, a good person.
I can't keep up with all the things the regime is doing. I can't keep up with it anymore. And every time I emphasize one, I realize I'm neglecting other major things they're up to. I assume, Lew, you saw those videos of Ray Epps.
Yes, oh, sure.
And there's been some pretty good reporting done on Ray Epps. And so I have to say, even though I do not trust Ted Cruz at all, don't trust him at all, and then his use of the word terrorism to describe people involved in January 6th, which is an absurdly over-the-top word that he tried to claim on Tucker. He misspoke. He has a legal background. He knows what the legal significance of that word is. He did not misspeak. But I will say that for whatever reason, he made Ray Epps front and center in some of his questioning of the FBI, I guess the FBI director in the hearing the other day. And he just demanded to know what the FBI's involvement in all this was. And he asked, did any FBI agents engage in acts of violence? And as Tucker said, it wouldn't have compromised the FBI's mission to say, what are you talking about? Of course not. Why would the FBI do such a thing? And it was, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. Something is extremely fishy about this. And that Ray Epps guy, something very fishy about that guy too. And that the left is suddenly absolutely content with him. Well, he answered our questions and he discharged his duty, and we thank Ray Epps. Sorry, that is not how they speak of anybody on January 6th. Not anybody, not even somebody just standing there taking pictures on his cell phone would they speak so kindly about. Something is going on.
Well, I think there's no question they had a bunch of people to manipulate the crowd and to break into the Capitol. And I think they hoped to cause a huge amount of damage. That did not happen. We're supposed to really be upset that the poor guy with the horn hat and all that walking around we're supposed to hate him. He's clearly somebody who had some mental questions. And now, of course, he's going to, I think, prison for 8 years, I think is what they're going to do, for having walked around the House chamber and sat in Nancy Pelosi's seat. Why, how dare he do something like that? Why, that's just the goddess is supposed to be there. So I think Epps was, I'm 100% sure Epps was an agent. Now, the FBI said that he never worked for any law enforcement agency. He didn't work for the FBI. But, of course, their question of him did not include they didn't include the fact that he might be a CIA agent or an agent of some other federal agency that we've never heard of. Or one of there are a bunch of these so-called intelligence agencies in the federal government. They didn't ask if he'd ever been involved in any of them. So I think clearly he was an agent provocateur. I think they had a bunch of them there, and they caused some damage. But again, these people trespassed. You shouldn't trespass. Although, again, this is supposed to be the people's house. They went into the people's house, but I guess they weren't people. The whole thing is horrendous, and especially the fact that people were being held in prison or being tortured by the guards, something we associate with other kinds of regimes than what we think of as the U.S., but is clearly now the U.S.
Hey, folks, as part of my sponsor message for BitTrust IRA, let me tell you what I gave 2 of my daughters for Christmas this year. I gave each of them 1/100th of a Bitcoin. Now, if you don't know about Bitcoin, that might not sound like a lot, but These days, it kind of is. And I thought that giving them a stake in Bitcoin would be a great way to introduce them to it. And of course, a lot of people have become very interested in Bitcoin, especially over the past several years. And they know they should hold it, but the cryptocurrency world can be confusing. Well, one thing a lot of people have been doing is adding Bitcoin to their retirement accounts. And BitTrust IRA helps you seamlessly and securely add cryptocurrency to your portfolio. BitTrust IRA stores your private keys in nuclear bunkers with military-grade encryption. Plus, they have a 24/7 trading platform with no minimum investments and unlimited trades, plus a team to help guide you along the way if you have any questions. They also offer the lowest trading fees in the industry. Go to bittrustira.com/woods today to learn more. And for a limited time, BitTrust IRA is waiving the sign-up fee for Tom Woods Show listeners. That's a $50 value. That's bittrustira.com/woods. BITTRUSTIRA.com/woods. When did you start LewRockwell.com? Late 90s. What was the year?
I started it 21 years ago.
Okay. So right around, let's say, the turn of this. I can't believe we're saying the turn of the century, and we're talking about the 21st century. What is happening in the world?
Yep.
So I'm curious about, over those years, obviously you have featured a ton of people, but is there a handful of people maybe that you're especially proud that you helped to give them a platform when, maybe yours was the biggest platform they ever had, and they had something important to say, and they were just otherwise not known, but you helped to get their message out?
Well, I think there are probably a lot of people in that category. People who are serious thinkers, serious writers, but of course would never be published by the New York Times or et cetera. So I would say there are a lot of people in that category. I don't know if I want to start naming them because I'm going to leave out other important people, but there's certainly a lot of people in that category, a lot.
Indeed. Now, for some reason, just because he died so young and so tragically, I think about Will Grigg as an example. He was a great investigative writer, and outside the mainstream, and no other libertarian organizations acted like he didn't even exist.
Well, they're all, of course, they're monsters. They're all typically, part of the Coctopus. They're either getting money from the Coctopus or they're desiring to get money from the Coctopus and doing what it bids. So Will Grigg, of course, never did that, and he was a great writer, great thinker, a great man, and he had a big family. His wife didn't work. I think it was not easy for him to make money to support his family, but he did it, and it never had any influence on him in terms of making him shut up or not say certain things. He was a hero, a great hero. I was honored to know him and to be able to work with him.
Yeah. Good man. Very, very good man. Very sound, just sound and everything.
Yes.
I want you to predict something for me, and it's hard to know how this is all going to develop. I think in the blue cities, these vaccine passport systems are at least not impossible. They could collapse in on themselves because they're going to ruin tourism. They're going to ruin businesses. Businesses will scream and scream and scream. It's possible that they'll just have to be withdrawn, especially for ages 5 and up. That's just absolute insanity. But in other countries, I mean, Lew, I was just getting going, starting to explore the world. I can't imagine that I'm never going to Austria again. What is your prediction about what's going to happen?
Well, Austria is a very interesting situation, and I think that there's tremendous opposition to what the government is doing. I mean, humongous demonstrations, and also there's a young member of the nobility who has gotten everybody who's a Catholic to come together in prayer groups once a week, pray against this sort of stuff, and that's had a big effect too, and brought a lot of people back to the church. So they're just great things are happening, and it's very interesting in the rural areas. Speaking about a subject I talked about earlier, people who are known have no problem going into restaurants even though they don't have a passport. Now, if you were in Vienna, it's a different story, of course, in a big city. But in the smaller towns, there's no problem. So I'd like to think that there's a future for Vienna and for Austria. But on the other hand, the government is so evil, so rotten. So, I mean, it's like the U.S. government. They're doing terrible things. They want to do more terrible things. But here's one thing we might take good feelings about. They originally said that they were going to have all this stuff come into efficacy on February 1st, then they changed it to March 1st, and now they're saying it's going to be at the end of April. So I think it has to be, they're not daring to put these things into effect.
Yeah.
These horrendous lockdowns and passports and all that stuff. So I think they're afraid to do it. I hope to goodness they stay afraid to do it and don't do it. But we have to hope. But certainly Austria has done terrible things. You have to be vaccinated in order to visit Austria, and of course everybody in Austria is supposed to be vaccinated. We just have to hope that doesn't happen. These vaccines are dangerous. People die from these vaccines, and they get horrible illnesses, horrible side effects. We're not supposed to mention that. They'll take you off the air from me mentioning that. Oh, no, they won't. But
yeah,
it's
but you have to wonder. I had Daniel McAdams on a few weeks ago from the Ron Paul Institute and the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and when I saw him at the event that the Mises Institute put on in Houston, and I guess Lake Jackson, I said, you need to come on my show. We need to talk about how do you navigate a YouTube-based show, which is what the Liberty Report is, when you know there are things you need and want to say that they don't want you to say, and that the however many hundreds of thousands of subscribers they have could be gone in an instant.
That's right.
So it is a real concern every single day. Lew, one more quick thing. You mentioned in talking about Austria, about people praying and some people returning to the church. Could you imagine how different the landscape might be if we had a man of the caliber of the 19th and 20th century pre-Vatican II popes in the chair of Peter, as opposed to a pathetic, weak left-wing apostate? Could you imagine that the church could be a rallying point against all this?
Absolutely, that would be the case. Would be a lot healthier internally too, of course. But Bergoglio is a monster, and he's I would say he's a heretic. And if he is a heretic, of course, he's not the Pope. So I think he's very, very, very bad for religion. And no question, you're exactly right. A lot of this stuff would not be happening if the church were properly run and properly going right down to the local parishes. It's not, of course.
Yeah. They've done everything possible over the past 50 or so years to make themselves as irrelevant as possible, as invisible as a cultural force as they can possibly be. So even if some,
I think they mean to do that. And there's no question the communists in the early days wanted to infiltrate the church and take it over and make it work their will. And it seems like that part of communism is still going on, unlike maybe the Soviet Union's gone, but the religious communists are still around and doing great evil. They really are monsters, like Bergoglio.
Right, and the thing is, I know some listeners might think we're exaggerating, but if you get your Catholicism from the movies, well, the movies still portray it as the old-fashioned, highly disciplinarian institution with incense and stained glass and old-fashioned looking buildings. No. That is absolutely wrong. And then you go to these metal concerts, like real black metal, and they want to down with the church. Look, guys, you won, all right? Accept yes for an answer. You won already, okay? What you're fighting against, for the most part, 90% of it, is a pathetic clown show where your parish is decorated with felt banners, and the music is not the tough Gregorian chant of the old days, but stupid, dumb, idiotic pap from 1977. Look, guys, you won already, okay? The church defanged itself for you. And that doesn't there's no way, you cannot possibly convince me that this just happened, that a bunch of people of goodwill decided to do these things. That is impossible. And I don't care what you call me. You can call me a conspiracy theory, whatever you want, whatever CIA term you want to apply to me, go ahead. But that doesn't happen spontaneously, Lew. So that's just impossible. Like if the Mises Institute all of a sudden started telling me that I really, really need to consider the possibility that Keynes had some great overlooked contributions, I would not say this is a natural evolution of the original mission of the Mises Institute. I wouldn't. I would say, who the hell's running the damn thing?
Of course, you're exactly right. And the church, it's unbelievable. And of course, it started at full speed during Vatican II, which was a total disaster. But it took a lot of planning. I think probably some of the earlier popes realized some of this was going on and tried to stop it. It didn't work. Again, is this communism? Is it Satan? It could be obviously the communists and Satan working. And Vatican II was a tremendous disaster. And everything has been a disaster since then. So that I've never forgotten going to the first and last time I went to the Catholic Church in near Ron Paul's house in Texas. And the priest, it was a clown mask. The priest was dressed as a clown, appropriately enough, by the way. And the children sitting around the altar. And the whole thing was just, I left. It's the only time I ever walked out of a mass, but it was just horrendous. And this is the church has pretty much disappeared as a force for good. And I don't think too many of us can hope that the next pope is going to be any better, although certainly he can be. And if God wills it, then we should certainly pray for that. But Bergoglio has been...
Oh, he's like a mouthpiece of every stupid left-wing cause.
No, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And our friend Chris Ferrara likes to say this. I want to ask the post-Vatican II hierarchy this question. What do we need you for? Why do we need the Catholic Church? Like, we already have people telling us about climate change, so we don't need you for that. We already have people telling us about income inequality, so we don't need you for that. You don't really seem to encourage anybody to convert to Catholicism, so apparently we don't even need you for that. So why are you here? And I don't think they have an answer to that question. Social work? We have social workers. We have the Salvation Army. What do we need you for?
Because the Salvation Army has gone entirely crazy on woke stuff.
That's a whole other...
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and it's so hard, this crazy world, because, then you walk by the individual Salvation Army person who probably doesn't even know anything about this, and you think, I don't even know what the right thing to do is here. Do I take this out on this poor individual, who's just thinks he's just doing a good thing? I mean, it's just poisoned so much of ordinary life, all this stuff.
Well, I saw Chris Ferrara being interviewed a few days ago, and he was doing a great job, I must say. And I hadn't seen him in a long time. Yeah,
he's been heroic through this. He's had some victories in the courts with religious liberty cases.
Yes,
so he's, so he's focused on this on this more narrow issue, but it's a winnable issue because he'll say, it's obviously discriminatory to say all these retail establishments can be open at 50%, but your church only at 25%. No. Sorry, you cannot do that. And so I realize that doesn't change the whole dynamic. But number one, it is a valid point. And number two, any victory you get in the courts against this regime is a win that's worth cherishing, in my opinion.
No, of course, that's exactly right. And we've just gone through such horrendous... I think for the first time in the long history of the church, they closed the churches because the government asked them to. They just closed them. There's no question about resisting or whatever. Just closed them. So it's my understanding that the only part of the church that stayed open, at least in the United States, was the separate thing set up by Benedict XVI of former Episcopalians and former Anglicans who become Catholics.
Yeah.
And I attended a mass recently in Houston at their cathedral. It's just spectacular, and it was entirely Catholic. And also, the first time I've ever seen at a mass hordes of little children. And by the way, they all behaved themselves. But there was just a tremendous number of little children, and I thought that's another sign that something is very good here. And I wish to goodness there were a parish like that around where I live.
There aren't that many. Actually, Ronnie Paul, I think, goes to one of them. And
yes,
every time I see him,
his wife took me to that one.
Okay, yeah. So that's what it is. And I'm trying to think, I have to type this into my computer, because if I can't think of the word, and then the whole world emails it to me. So we've got one of these such churches. So basically, it's a church that was once Episcopalian, but where the whole parish converts.
Yes.
And Benedict made provision for such parishes. so that they could still have a liturgy like they used to have, with very small modifications like prayers for the Pope and stuff like that. But otherwise, what they have is kind of like the traditional Latin Mass, except in Elizabethan English. And
that's right.
I can't think of the word that they use. It's driving me crazy. In fact, it is Ordinariate. That's the word. They call it the Ordinariate. And within this structure, these parishes can function without interference from the local bishop. They have their own special bishop, Stephen Lopez, who is actually a great guy. It's astonishing. And he was appointed by Francis. So none of this is adding up. But you're right. Their churches stayed open. And in fact, my understanding is that the one we have in Orlando, Incarnation Catholic Church, has actually seen its membership double during this time. Now, I think also probably the Society of St. Pius X churches stayed open. I would be surprised if they closed. But of course, they are not in the good graces of the church. But I would be very surprised if they closed. But I don't have any of those nearby, so I wouldn't be able to verify that.
Now, I was raised in the Episcopal Church, so maybe I'm a little bit different than some others, but it was like going home in a wonderful sense. I mean, it was because it was Catholic and it was Anglican, just very moving and a tremendous experience. I'm very grateful to Ronnie and Peggy Paul for having taken me.
Yeah. I mean, if you think there is a small number of old Latin masses in the U.S., it's even smaller for the Ordinariate. I think between the U.S. and Canada, it's something like 44 parishes. But if you find one, it's gold, and it'll be normal people. They, as far as I can see, they were unmasked the whole time also, which is also masks, important. Yeah. And no distancing, like you can't sit in this pew because then you'll get the virus. I mean, look, come on. This is crazy stuff. So, all right, look, I feel like a lot of people who listen to the Tom Woods Show are pretty familiar with LewRockwell.com, but let's have a renewed appreciation for what Lew does. The sites you should check out are LewRockwell.com, L-E-W, Rockwell.com, and then, of course, Mises.org, M-I-S-E-S.org. Sink your teeth into those sites, and if it's your first time, your friends and family aren't going to hear from you for a few days because you're just going to be scouring them, reading. You're going to come out unshaven and, with long hair and fingernails and whatever. And say, I can't believe what I've just been reading. So, Lew, for all the stuff that you've done, first of all, for me personally as a really, really valuable and cherished benefactor over the years, and then what you've done for all of us, my thanks.
Well, Tom, I owe you thanks, of course, and so do all your listeners, for the tremendous job you do. Your podcasts are world famous, and rightly so.
Very kind of you to say, Lew. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for today. But remember, I have coming up an announcement that I'm making February 1st, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, that I will not be making on the podcast, but it is of importance to everybody who listens. And I guarantee you are going to want to hear it. And the way to hear it is to go to TomWoodsAnnouncement.com and sign up to be among the first to be notified. I assure you, it is an urgent announcement. I also have set up another way to get notified. It also will be through email, but to opt into the list, another way you can do it if you're in the U.S. is by texting the word announcement to the number 66866. So just type in 66866 and text the word announcement to that number, and you will also get the notification email when the announcement is ready. But I insist to you, if you listen to this show regularly, I need to get this announcement to you. So do please take that action at TomWoodsAnnouncement.com, and I will see you all tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit TomWoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at Podsworth.com.